Hello and welcome to another Real Digital Stories. My name is Cas Majid. I'm the Chief Exec of Wow Group of Companies, and I'm super excited today with our very special guest, which I'm going to introduce in a second. But before we do that, you'll have noticed that our format has slightly changed because we have a third person on this recording. And let me introduce you to Matt Jones. Matt, can you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
I sure can. Thank you, Kasim. So I'm Partnerships Manager at Wow Group of Companies. And what that means is I forge and build collaborative relationships with our partners. And that's three main partners. So that's our amazing digital agencies. So we provide development resource for those agencies. It's the e-commerce platform. So BigCommerce, Shopify, and more recently, Ecommerce. And our innovative tech partners, so the likes of Vik Kapoor and Stateset.
So thank you, Matt. So I'm absolutely thrilled now to introduce our next guest, who's going to be talking about his real digital stories. And I'm so excited to ask Vik about some questions about his journey. Vik Kapoor, let me give you some background now. I've got a massive sheet of paper here with his bio. So I'm just going to give you a plotted history. Vik has had 20 years in growth, turnaround, and exiting companies. He's the chief exec and founding partner of 7 Train Ventures, which is based out in New York. He's been involved in mergers, acquisitions, IPOs, M&As. Vik is also the founder of Stateset, who we are really, really proud to be partnering with. And also Polar Lake, DApps, and many other things. But Vik, the most important thing and most interesting thing with your amazing accolades of what you've done is this thing that I picked up from your bio, that you want to have agendaless conversations. Now, what I mean by that is agenda in meetings, agendaless conversations. You have 3 amazing kids. You love sports, and we are absolutely thrilled to have you here. Welcome, Vik.
Hey, thanks for having me. And it's amazing you picked agendaless conversations, but if we're going to have one, that's great.
And this is what Real Digital Stories is all about. It's about having those conversations that are really fluid, that we find out a little bit more about you. So my first question to you, Vik, is how did you get to where you are right now? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Okay, so I'm the son of immigrant parents who left everything in India to bring me here with 20 bucks in their pocket. And I was about 2 years old in New York City. And if you remember New York City back in 1980, 81, it was the Iranian oil embargo, or interest rates were almost 20%, unemployment was around the same thing. And very dangerous back streets of Flushing, Queens, New York. But looking over the next 20 years, the kind of diverse background I got, the experience of having, a family from Taiwan as my neighbor, somebody from Brazil as my other neighbor, the kids on the street who left the USSR, parents left the USSR to come to the US. And it's pretty fascinating to think back at the United Nations type upbringing I got, which really influenced not only probably my career in the way I sort of look at things through a lens of very humanitarian, but also knowing that there's a secret behind every stone that hasn't been turned over yet, and the ability that you can constantly learn from everyone. And I think just keeping that student of life hat on, a tremendous amount of humility and thirst for knowledge has kind of allowed me to constantly learn from, I met a woman at a bar the other day, Nancy. She's 85 years old. Her husband just passed away from cancer. And she was, graduated high school in 1955, and listening to her stories of growing up around Massachusetts, where she was when Kennedy was shot, how she brought up 3 wonderful kids in the United States, to spending time with a sophomore in high school who I played soccer with on Saturday mornings, and listening to how he's staying up till midnight every night working because school is overwhelming, and thinking oh, wow, I didn't experience either of those. But it's really fascinating to sort of appreciate everybody's individual story And I think looking at my own background, being of somewhat Indian heritage and growing up around so many cultures so early in life, you realize everybody has a story, and through that story, they view the world. And oftentimes, what does that mean? They're having a conversation with you right now through that lens. So it's extremely important to understand their own lens, their own story, and there's where that mutual respect comes from learning from their story.
Thank you for that, Vic. It's given me a really kind of insight, and I noticed that just in the background there, you've got a picture of Kennedy himself, which I think you're a big fan of, right?
Yeah, I got it. Actually, it's Kennedy. It's actually Robert F. Kennedy and Kennedy throwing a football around, and then Martin Luther King below him, which you don't see. There's also one of Buddha and Al Pacino from The Godfather. But and my kids and I lying down at a beach at the corner where the wave actually comes and hits the shore, and we're lying down. So what do you want me like? So that's a very important picture of Kennedy. As I've gotten older, I've become a little bit less of a fan of John F. Kennedy and more of a fan of Robert F. Kennedy, more from the humanitarian aspect. But actually, that's a very important photo because that's just before the television debate with Nixon, and everyone thought that he had zero chance. But it's kind of interesting to see the psychological bias that happened on that television debate, because he was the best dressed, and nobody told Nixon not to wear plaid shirts on those old TVs. So it was very difficult to focus on Nixon, what he was saying, because everyone was focused on like the way the shirt was looking. And some say, you know, he somewhat won that debate. But I actually really appreciate that photo because he was completely in the zone, and you kind of like look at that photo and he's just hyper focused before the lights come on into like what he's going to do on this television debate as a young, you know, John F. Kennedy against a very well-known Richard Nixon. Yeah, so those sort of moments, I think, embody the stories that you know of people like JFK.
So Vic, let me take you back 20 years. I know you've had you've worked with the likes of people like Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan. You've been involved in, startups, investment, IPOs, etc. How did you get into what you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about that journey from where you started to where you are now with Stateset and 7 Train Ventures. Take us on that journey a little bit.
Okay, no pun intended with the 7 Train journey.
No.
But I took the 7 Train growing up, and the 7 Train was actually the immigrant train where everybody started in Flushing, Queens, and then end up in Times Square. So the train is actually extremely important. So I think looking at Wall Street, I learned a lot. It was a hyper pressure zone. It was front office trading floor style. You're only as good as your next trade, and nobody cared how much you made last year. Nobody cared what you did the day before. It was a very, very, performance-based culture of alpha people, top of the class everywhere they went, hyper performing, and nobody took things personal. And that was something that was really, really fascinating, because you could yell, scream, and curse out somebody next to you, and then once the trade was done, you moved on to the next one, and everything was business. And it's something that I kind of carried on as I've gotten more into the venture space. Let's see, like if I had to answer your question, I think the one thing that Wall Street really teaches you, at least that I took away, was arbitrage. You really look for the gaps, right? You really look for like the value, and then you got to go get that value before anybody gets it. It's kind of like drawing a line in your water, right? The line goes away just as fast as you drew it. You draw a line in the sand, it'll stick around until somebody else finds it, right? But arbitrage is just that fast, just that quick. So the entire value creation that I was watching happening while I was on Wall Street, a lot of it was actually happening in the VC space and not in Wall Street. But Wall Street was doing a great job sort of capturing it, packaging it, and then selling it on, right? And I wanted to continuously learn in Wall Street, but I was having a great amount of FOMO as to like what's happening in the VC space in Silicon Valley and all these great pockets of ecosystem innovation that I'm completely missing out on. So when I had the chance to sort of become an entrepreneur, I left Wall Street. I focused really on like uncovering the secrets under the stones of the VC space. It took a lot of work. I had to cash in a lot of favors, and I had to sleep on some dirty mattresses and shake off the banker reputation that it's fascinating to see the VC space sort of, is against. If you think of like a villain and a hero, the venture space kind of looks at Wall Street as somewhat of a villain. And it's somewhat of the same as well, between the hero and villain story, with Wall Street sort of looking at the VCs. However, those tribes are sort of breaking down now. I think now there's a little bit more collab, and you sort of see it in the ideas of like a fintech company is working more so with a JP Morgan versus, maybe 10 years ago, there was more of a disruptor of the incumbent mentality. So looking at sort of that 10-year arc in Wall Street and then the last 10, 12-year arc in the VC space, I think there's a lot of value that's being created, a lot of leveraging of great technology. What's interesting is that e-commerce to me is a phenomenal place to sort of be, because number one, it's the great pulse of the younger generation that has suffered a lot, especially now during COVID. They really are staying home. They, some of them is college. They open up Shopify sites, WooCommerce sites, and they really got into like, I want to own my own destiny. And it's somewhat of a bug that I can relate to. I've always had like, I don't want to be working for somebody else who's going to determine what my pay and my career trajectory is. And I think if you have that sort of freedom and foresight of thought of owning your own destiny, e-commerce is actually quite liberating. If you think of an artist, you think of somebody creating a bracelet, or you think of somebody painting, you think of somebody buying goods from Alibaba and then selling them in the United States, or you think of somebody who's being creative and packaging up certain amount of SKUs and creating their own SKU, and building that really important relationship with their customer base directly. Unlike opening up a store where frankly you have salespeople that somewhat own your brand, or if you have a drive-through, you're at the behest of that actual delivery of the food, or if you own a soccer club or a football club, I beg your pardon, everybody's relationship to that brand is their own version of their brand equity. It's their lens of which they see it, right? So a win or a loss versus like the hiring of a coach versus what one of your players may have tweeted, or one of your employees may have uncovered from their past. There's always a relationship that people have with their own tribes, and in modern day society and capitalism, that tribes somewhat are owned by brands, right? The McDonald's, Apples, the Coca-Colas, the Samsungs, the Elon Musks versus the Bezos, right? So you kind of get that a lot, and the younger generation has, I think, has always a great pulse on like what's hot, what's not. And I'll give you one quick story. It's, some argue that the USSR broke up and the Cold War ended, obviously because Gorbachev and Reagan worked it out. But some argue it was MTV, right? Some say there was so much pent up pressure by the younger generation inside the USSR, like, I want my Pepsi, I want my Michael Jackson, right? I want my music, I want my freedom, I want to choose what I want. I don't want it to be rammed down my throat. And that's sort of like breaking free is kind of like where you see the potentially like, a metaphor of like breaking down the Berlin Wall and taking down the USSR. Was, some argue that it was pop culture that did it. And if you look at modern day e-com, I think you see that sort of like remnant or at least the ingredients of like owning our own destiny, owning our own brand, having a relationship to our customers, understanding what our customer needs are directly, that first party data. I don't want to have to rip up CSV reports or get a third party agency to tell me what my customers want. I'll just ask them. And being able to have that first party conversation, I think you get closer and closer to the truth as to like, what are the customers' feedback? What do they actually want? You go on Amazon sometimes, it's not even the right review. There's pictures of a completely different product. You can sort of see how like AI is distorting the truth. And anybody with 2 brain cells can go down and start to see these are not actual reviews, and Amazon is beginning to suffer from that. The benefit of having your own brand on e-commerce, the benefit of being a merchant is you're not susceptible to those entry points of a third party coming in and writing another review. It's kind of fascinating. Apple's a really cool example. Apple, I don't know, tens of millions of followers on Twitter and Facebook, and have never posted on either of those 2 platforms ever, because they don't want to invite negative reviews. Very smart on how they interact with their audience. They maintain only a linear communication. And for, if you think of the sub brands, the Apple Musics of the world, right? The Apple TVs of the world, they use the sub brands to their brand equity sort of built up by the education of the writers that are talking about each of their sub brands. And by that, in aggregate, becomes the brand of Apple. So a young, impressionable mind right now is saying, hey, I'm 14 years old, mom, dad, do I want a Samsung or do I want an iPhone? Well, Apple is just so elusive. There's so many wonderful things about it. I do want Apple anything. And I look at e-commerce, and it kind of has the 10-year ability where merchants can start to say, I want to build my own sub brands. I want to build my own relationships with my customers. And now technology has sort of gotten to the place where it empowers even younger merchants to get to having like their own single source of truth, having their own technology that sort of enables them to have a much better conversation with their customers, but also have a much better relationship with their own partners, their vendors, their manufacturers.
And some of the work that you're doing with the digital transformation with the World Economic Forum, which kind of really jumped out of your bio. I know Matt's got some kind of questions around that. I think this kind of links into some of the trends that we're seeing, particularly with young people. Matt, I know you kind of got a few burning questions.
No, thank you for that, Kasim. Vikal, I know you've worked on some amazing projects, and what a fascinating story, by the way. Some could call you a technology veteran. But I'm interested in, I did spot on your bio about your involvement with the World Economic Forum, obviously a global, international body, well-respected body. Tell us a bit more about your involvement with the World Economic Forum. I'd love to hear it.
Surely. So my involvement is to be part of their digital transformation committee. I was appointed that several years ago, and it's basically very, very altruistic. I'd say, top of their game executives, minus myself, just happen to go spend, 4 sessions throughout the year. We meet in San Francisco, the Middle East, London, and then Singapore or Hong Kong, where basically we get together and we work on public-private partnerships. We also share our own versions of like the work that we're performing. So for example, like I do a lot on the blockchain side, explain to them like where I sort of see blockchain disrupting incumbents, how it would help sectors, and sort of where blockchain technology sort of fits into the scheme. And everybody brings their own very good perspective. And I think the World Economic Forum, being an independent body, being extremely well respected, I'd say by the 1%ers, right? It's very influential, both from a private perspective, right? Private corporations, private money, but also from a public perspective, by inviting many of those who have won voting blocks in their own countries, in their own regions. So you really have a lot of strong thought leadership. If there was ever really an influential body nowadays, I'd say more so than even the UN, which some would argue has become toothless to some degree. It's really the World Economic Forum, which is closer to writing checks, taking on harder projects like climate change, protecting the Great Barrier Reef, mitigating fraud in like driver's license applications in New Delhi, India, for example, right? So like they really take on what somebody else may not want to take on. So how do you get bright minds to take on, tough challenges? I think the WEF does a very good job of kind of bringing us together and facilitating a lot of good conversation. Again, it's an agendaless conversation when we have like our breakout sessions. Nobody has an agenda. We're really there just to learn from each other. And and just try to make it a good place. And then we get on a plane and we're off. And they also discourage anybody using the forum for, capitalistic purposes, which I think is very healthy. I know I'm not getting back to my inbox and trying to somebody sell me a software or tell me to work with them. If I would like to, I'm happy to do it. But I think that, WEF has done a very good job, and I think it'll continue to do a good job. If you ask me some of the gaps, which you should, you got to do both sides of the ledger. I think they should invite younger and younger minds. I used to say as a kid, like, why aren't there young kids in Congress? Like, you're making laws as adults for us. Now I'm an adult. I'm thinking, well, why aren't the kids in the room? Like that. It's important to listen to them too.
Agreed, Vik. Agreed.
Vik, just staying with that, and I know you've done a lot of traveling around, around different parts of the world. How does the US differ to other parts of the world when it comes to the adoption of technology and the attitude towards investment? I mean, I'm part of Birmingham Tech Week here in Birmingham, and one of the big things is in attracting inward investment as part of that Tech Week. And we see different nuances from Manchester to London to Birmingham, and I'm being fortunate to work across the world as well. What do you think that the differences in attitude in those two things? One is, investment, attracting investment, risk, and the second is how they do business.
Okay, well, the US being 25% of global GDP, it's hard that it's difficult that any sector doesn't touch the United States of America. And looking at like the speed of business globally, having the ability to make decisions and moving up to sort of the chain of command to make those decisions really puts you at a fortuitous position. So for good or bad, I'm not judging, I'm just saying the United States tends to be in that top right aspect of the matrix, right? The majority of business happening, also the speed of business happening, which I think gets to a little bit of your point. Like the innovation that you see in the United States is so welcomed because it's encouraged. Risk-taking is very encouraged in this culture, more so than I've seen anywhere else in the world. And I think that starts from the DNA, right? I came to this country and I came to the country with the mindset I have to go from 0 to 1, right? As Peter Thiel did. Not only 0 to 1, but I have to own the journey. And there's no one who goes from 0 to 1. Well, if there are, there's few, or they're lying, who didn't fail several times. And the other thing about the United States is they get really roots for the comeback story, right? You think of like Muhammad Ali's second career, and you think of Jordan's second career, and you think of like, it really is like, we want that comeback. And then we want that underdog to win, because that's kind of like the DNA of the culture. It's not one of like, I inherited my position, I inherited my wealth, I inherited my status. Last names don't matter here. At least, it's obviously there's exceptions to it, but the majority of it, anybody anywhere here could become the next Zuckerberg, could be the next Bezos. If you subscribe success as having wealth. But there's so many wonderful humanitarians here who you may not know, and they purposely are anon, or they have pseudonyms, or they go nameless. And so you also see the United States as the largest philanthropic donor anywhere else by far. The number 2 is not even close, because people are just extremely generous. And that comes down back to the DNA. Like they're trying to constantly provide an ecosystem of helping. And Silicon Valley is a phenomenal example of it, right? Those who went there in the 80s and the 90s were from there, have done well, and then have contributed back by making their own risk investments, 50,000 here, 150,000 there, which allows a younger entrepreneur to say, you know what, I can actually step away and I can work on this risky idea, this innovation, and have the ability that like there's food, in my fridge, and rent can be paid. Let's just see how that works out. And that's sort of like, human equity, and investing in human equity, I think is critical. People invest in time and money in where they see themselves, right? And if you see somebody young and you're like, oh, you're like me 10 years ago, I'm not sure you're 100% right on what you're doing, but I'm willing to take a bet. And if you're 80% right, I'll help you, fill up the gap of the other 20%. Or here are 5 people I know you should talk to, keep it going, right? And I think that culture, that DNA of risk taking, of inviting that comeback spirit, and really looking to take on and solve hard problems, is here. Like like complacency is somewhat looked at as a bane to your existence, right? Like we came to this country, we sacrificed. Now what? Like you got to keep it going, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, I think a lot of people look at it as the attitude to risk, but it sometimes is the attitude to iteration. Somebody give you some money to go through this iterative process of getting to where you need to get to. And I think it's that attitude of, it's not so much a risk, but we're helping you towards getting to where you need to get to. And I think this whole law of reciprocity of big corporations and big business people that you just mentioned, they understand that to get, you have to give as well, whether it's your time, whether it's money. I mean, you've just kind of highlighted that in a very, very, very beautiful way, that there's big philanthropic mindset in the US as well, which we don't really see, here in Europe. We see, they're really good at business, they're really good at marketing, they're really good at getting a product and getting it out there, and there is, but that philanthropic attitude, we don't really see that here in the UK, and it's really good that you've mentioned that. Let's move on to where you are right now. And I'm really, really proud that actually a few weeks ago that Wow Group of companies signed a partnership deal with one of your organizations, Stateset. Tell us a little bit about Stateset, and also the thing that Matthew was talking about. Matthew, what's the other thing that we were talking about, which we thought was actually amazing?
I think in the single source of truth, we'd love our viewers to learn a bit more about what that means. And I think in simplistic terms, what problem does Stateset solve? I think that'd be really good to answer.
Yeah, Stateset solves for the problem that a merchant, a vendor, or a manufacturer in the world of commerce is looking to grow. In order to grow, they need the best and latest information at their fingertips to make a decision. The second derivative of that is, what's in my inventory? Where is my stuff? How do I service the customer service ticket? How do I understand my customer journey? What's my product journey? So those problems are actually complicated problems, and there's an app for that, right? And there's lots of apps for that. Now, if you're an e-commerce merchant and you love your trade, you love your brand, you're building up your tribe, oh my God, the last thing you want to do is solve for the post-sales journey, which in our opinion is probably the most important journey to maintaining LTV, a high LTV, and a low CAC, because we all go back to purchase from and engage with brands where we feel comfortable on the returns process, on the refunding process, but also it's really implicitly telling us you can trust this brand for its quality. It's both of its quality as a product and quality of a service. So the post-sales experience is the most understated experience that is being solved for by disparate apps. So what Stateset said was like, we have to solve for this post-sales experience. How do you aggregate the apps that people know and they love and they're already using, and create one single source of truth where all of the information, like a SKU, is the same SKU across all of your apps? The information of Matt Jones is in the CRM is the same as Matt Jones in the customer service in Gorgeous or Zendesk, is the same as ShipBob or ShipHero or ShipStation, is the same that's in your CRM. It's the same that's in Stripe. It's the same reconciled later. And then when your marketing team says, oh, I want to run a campaign on Matt Jones, they know they're running it on that Matt Jones, not 9 others. So really having that golden source record, it allows merchants to in real time interact with accurate information and seamlessly keep a post-sales experience very good, not only for the customers that are interacting with them, but the forgotten stakeholders, really the employees at the company, right? Everybody working on customer service. It's very challenging if you have a demanding customer saying, you know, where is my stuff? Or did you process my refund? Or tell me more about your products that are not online. You know, that's extremely daunting for a customer service to have to go get the information from so many other reports, from so many other apps. And by the way, do it while the customer is responding. Hello, are you there? Hello, are you there? Are you a bot? Are you a human? You know, this really makes customer service and employees start to say, well, I'm going on LinkedIn, I'm looking for another job. And that's why you're also seeing a tremendous amount of attrition in post-sales, and merchants are beginning to feel that in their 2.0 versioning. So as merchants and brands start to evolve, I think the importance of delivering a post-transaction experience is going to become more important. And we really took an approach of, rather than throwing people at it or throwing apps at it, to really use AI. And we use some of the best AI on the planet with OpenAI. And that OpenAI is able to aggregate all the information and in half a second provide the responses to the questions I asked you, because it's using intelligent automation to be able to extract the data and then provide the data right back. So if you are a customer service rep, you can just press generate response and it'll get the answer that you need, that Matt Jones has been asking. Or if you have a returns process is very complicated. Our customers see that it takes them 22 to 25 minutes on average, and there's errors. You know, returns process creates labels. You have to reconcile against your accounting books and your systems and your general ledgers. You have to make sure that the return wasn't already processed. Maybe your warehouse is still waiting for it. Your warehouse is uploading into their own system, sending a CSV file at night that they received the product, and then they're sending it over for you, and then you're processing the return. Meanwhile, Matt Jones keeps on asking, where's my refund? Where's my refund? So in order for us to solve for that, we reduce that down to 40 seconds by really giving the warehouse the ability to scan directly into Stateset, the ability for everybody at the merchant to see the latest on the return, and automating that with AI so that all those processes just become one seamless process rather than having multiple workflows solving multiple processes. And that starts with the single source of truth. You have to have golden source data. You have to have golden source records. Otherwise, you cannot reconcile anything. If you have, you know, an HSBC account and you have a Barclays account and somebody asks you how much money do you have, you actually have to go into both accounts to tell you the answer. But if you have an SSOT app, it'll have the aggregated information in it all the time. And you'll stop going into HSBC and stop going into Barclays.
So from a merchant's point of view, I'm just going to paint a picture here, Vik. I started my business 5 years ago online. I've got a Shopify website, or I've got a Ecommerce, but I've got an e-commerce website. And over the years, my business has grown. I'm now doing really well, you know, and I see exponential growth happening over the next couple of years. And I've grown what I call the post-it note type scenario, sticky tape. Yeah, I've got these apps that allow me to do, you know, post-sales, sales order processing, some warehousing, some return stuff, but I have to log into so many different things that I'm duplicating information. So what you're saying is that Stateset is a layer that feeds all those apps into one particular layer of information. You log in once and you have all the information to hand. So you can then relay that information internally and to your customers a lot quicker. Is that in simplified terms what Stateset does?
Yeah, so there's benefits both to the merchant and the developers in the back. So you log in, single sign-on, one password to remember. There's a search bar on the top and you can begin right there. It's like your own internal Google intranet, right? Across all your apps. Now, just that feature, which is our most popular feature, saves all of our users tremendous amount of time searching for information, right? They can put Matt Jones in there. They can put a SKU in there. They put a Stripe address in there. They put they put a any kind of identifier in there, or they put like blue swimming shorts, and all of a sudden all the blue swimming shorts pop up. The importance of really putting it all together has allowed everyone in a single view to aggregate all their apps. And then we put, you know, a search bar, able to put the AI to like process the return very quickly, doing inventory management very quickly. Yeah, so indeed, if you think of just inventory management, for example, right now you have supply chain issues all around the world, right? And the winners such as Dollar General and Walmart are winning because they have great visibility into their supply chain. And that is the single greatest variable to determining success. And if you're a merchant and you're an e-commerce merchant trying to deliver a great customer experience, well, there's no worse customer experience than not delivering the goods or sending them the wrong goods. And right now you see that, and we don't believe this second derivative of supply chain is going to go away. It is only going to become more complex as you start to see more e-commerce merchants pop up. Vendors start to realign themselves as to which merchants they want to serve, and manufacturers making larger bets on like where they want to go with their own decisions of like electronics versus semiconductors. And you're going to start to see this new world sort of pop up where we weren't really keen to this before because we took supply chain so much for granted. We didn't care for it. But anybody who's worked in supply chain logistics knows that the second and third and fourth derivative of supply chain is that everything is connected. There's nothing not connected nowadays in today's world. And I don't mean from an IoT perspective, but I mean the food on your table, right? I mean the shirt that you wear and the lenses that go into your glasses and the razor that's on your blade. So if you really clean up your supply chain, if you really get a great visibility into it, you can create the partnerships. And we sort of see our customers create much better partnerships with their vendors and manufacturers because they're all seeing the same information. They're all communicating on the same Slack or the same on Stateset. They're also have accurate information to make better decisions. So what is the derivative of that? What's the derivative of that is our CMOs of our customers are able to say, hey, I would love to run a targeted campaign based upon what's coming off the pallet. Oh, and by the way, the third derivative of that is like, I would actually like to create a campaign of a product I don't even have yet because I've informed my manufacturer, if I could create this demand, would you be able to supply it? So today in our 1.0 world, we see very much like create a demand through your customers and meet the demand. And nowadays, that's what e-commerce has become in a post-COVID world. We see the world very quickly. The winners are going to be separated are the ones who say, well, how can I forecast the demand? How can I do demand sensing? When you can do demand sensing, you can say, Matt Jones has a wife and she likes this around holidays. Maybe I can offer this now in October. She can pre-order it and I can send her a packaged wardrobe of things she might like. And she'll return when she doesn't like, and she could feel comfortable purchasing as like an interior designer. Or I actually can do demand sensing on like pre-sales and pent-up demand. Imagine a world in a 3.0 state, and we see the world going here. Imagine a world where you actually have a website where you don't own any products. You're a merchant who doesn't own any products. You actually know your customers, and you say, tell me what you want. And you use those customer analytics to then inform your manufacturer, who's like, oh, I'll be right back. That actually happens every time you walk into a Starbucks. They take your cup, they write your name down, and by the time you get to the end, your cup is there with the exact product you wanted inside of it. You don't need AI, you don't need anything there, but what do you have? You actually have the truth, like a game of telephone that goes exactly to the barista, back to Matt Jones. That customer feedback loop in the most simplistic way is missing from the e-commerce journey because we focus so much on growing your GMV, growing your demand, but you never think about meeting that demand. And meeting that demand is really going to be the way you differentiate like somebody extremely successful, a brand that's extremely successful, profitable, and I mean extremely profitable because they have visibility into their partners, their inventory, their visibility into the inventory, not just in the manufacturer, but what's in the C, what's in the 3PL, and what's in your warehouse.
Vik, are you able to share some results from some of your current customers? Any results or what I'd also like to hear as well, Vic, is what platforms can you integrate with? What e-commerce platforms? So 2 questions there.
Yeah, so we have over 24 integrations. We have a new integration every week based upon customer demands. So we have all the majors. We purport to say we have the tech stack of choice. So I'll take this question a little differently. Some investors we talk to who are actually opening up multiple e-commerce brands, they say they hate the fact they have to keep deciding on new tech stacks. Could I just have a one-stop shop, like tech stack as a service? And that's really the mindset where we came into. Like, look, you're an artist, you're a merchant, focus on your customer demand, your needs. We'll provide you with the most agile tech stack, which is composable for the future. Gartner's using the word composable. It's basically the idea of future proofing, right? But I don't have to be like, oh, in 4 years, I got to rip this out. Or I already have my apps, but oh my God, the integrations cost, $100,000, $200,000 on SPS or BrightPro. Like, I would much rather have an agile system where I don't have to hire engineers and admins to constantly upgrade and update APIs and that. So we've created a system where basically all your apps, and to answer your question directly, Stripe, ShipStation, ShipHero, Gorgeous, Zendesk, FedEx, Klaviyo, the majority of the tech stack we have, and if we don't have it, we rapidly can spin it up, and we do very often based upon customer demand. But the interesting thing here is that our merchants, and to answer your question, like here's an example, they love the fact that we're also their snowflake. We're a single point API for them. So they don't actually have to have engineers who have to like integrate into all these apps, do all these integrations, and then maintain it overnight. They just integrate into Stateset. They just plug into Stateset and we become their snowflake. So we created the first snowflake for e-commerce where web agencies don't have to have people updating products on Shopify directly. They can update it in Stateset. And that product update is being done with the accurate information. And more so, we can broadcast that. So they have multiple Shopify stores, Zendesk, and then they have, WooCommerce. That one product update broadcasts to all of that, rather than having to keep going in and keep going in. And so the benefits really take hold when you think of like, how do I centralize all of the information and then decentralize the ability to access that centralized information. So our customers find a lot of benefits. So what do we see? We see them growing GMV 30% quarter over quarter on average without hiring people. That second part of what I just said is actually the most important part of what I said, because growth is going to happen in e-commerce. Right now, you can throw darts, you can create a company and you'll be fine with GMV. But how will you maintain GMV profitability? And that really comes down to productivity, and that really comes down to like automating all your processes and your apps. And we've seen customers of ours grow in many ways. One customer has turned on subscriptions. Subscriptions is actually the fastest growing segment we are seeing in e-commerce, right? It's analogous to like an Apple Care. When you buy an iPhone, you're also buying a monthly there. But some are saying, I want to do like the Amazon model, a subscribe and save model, right? So we're seeing subscriptions, which is very complicated if you think from an engineering perspective, but from a merchant perspective, they just want the ability to like add that feature. Yeah. And there are now apps out there that you can add that feature. But that app is not integrated with your inventory. It's not integrated with Stripe. It's actually, all those integrations then take hold and can get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. What we did with subscriptions, we had a customer who turned it on, and they got 30,000 customers as new additional revenue within a couple of months.
Wow, amazing! Very, very powerful application. I'm super proud that we're representing you here in Europe. So, Vik, but coming up to the final part of this amazing session, is what's the future? We've just seen Mr. Zuckerberg talk about the Metaverse. And if you've been in this industry for quite some time, back in 2010, we had this thing called Second Life, which was a virtual world where you could buy your brands and you could walk into stores and all that kind of stuff. And now it's matured now because the technology is kind of more, it's more immersive. and people have become more used to these kind of immersive experiences. How do you see e-commerce changing with this advent of the metaverse?
So Metaverse, what was previously Facebook, right? They're making the big bet on Oculus and the idea of an immersive experience. I think there's definitely room for that. How much room there is for it will have to be yielded by transactions. Like, let's see how much transactions actually occurred. Do you feel like you walk into a Neiman Marcus or a Saks Fifth Avenue or a Nike store, or your favorite brand and feel like you're there and transacting? I think we're quite far away from the metaverse and the commerce world coming together enough so that we're seeing it on a daily basis, right? I'd probably say 7 to 8 years if I had to put my money on it at best. But I would also say there's a lot of pushback from the younger generation right now on social media and engagement. They're finding their own pockets and then turning off when they want to turn off. So the life of social media in itself, I think, is a bigger question. What will social media look like in 2-3 years? As you kind of see today, third-party data is the reason why social media, Google, advertising is flourishing. The gasoline for all of those companies is third-party data. Third-party data, I think, has a short shelf life. It's becoming spam. If I want to know what Matt Jones wants to wear, I'm going to ask Matt Jones. And when I have a good relationship with Matt Jones and he trusts me, he'll tell me. And he'll tell me what his children's shoe sizes are. And I'll know when his wife is pregnant. And that's a good relationship that I'll have with him, and I'll be able to service him as I need to. And commerce will become an automated transaction. And we see that world emerging. It should be an automated demand filling transaction. And I think that's the fifth industrial revolution, actually, automated transactions. I gave a talk a few years ago about on the fourth generation, and someone asked what's the fifth, and I still hold true to automated transactions. It'll know exactly what you want. It'll make it happen. One example of that is your credit card is being swiped by Amazon all the time. We don't even know it. It's just an automated transaction on subscribe and save, something that you did months ago, right? Imagine that starts happening in other things like banking, mortgages, pay for things. That actually is happening if you think about it the way I just said. It's an automated transaction. But the buying decision in commerce is still very human-centric. Can that be filled with an immersive experience? I'm not very bullish on it. I think humans fundamentally still enjoy a physical aspect of commerce. And if it's not an immersive, artificial experience, I think live commerce has a better space. Live commerce where there's influencers, or there's those who really know the product, somebody who is in keto and is a keto trainer, personal trainer, talking about a keto diet and talking about keto products, or a chef who says, these are the products I use in my kitchen, let's cook, right? I think that kind of experience is going to be more of a Netflix next version, meeting commerce, where you can buy right on Netflix and you say, oh my God, I love that. And then you get back to your computer and it says, hey, we just saw you saw that with Bobby Flay on Netflix. Here are the products that he went over. Would you like to purchase any of these?
Vik, that has been absolutely amazing. And one final question just before we finish. It's a question that I ask of a lot of people, is what 3 things would you take on a desert island?
Can it be my kids?
There's 3 of them. Of course
then
you can.
I'm up with all 3. There's my short answer. Actually, the funny thing is, I always said, if I went to prison and I could take something, what would I take? And I was like, the only thing I'd want to take is my ability to be sane, calm, cool. I don't need anything. The universe is inside us.
Beautiful answer, Vik. And
I'm going to
absolutely
leave it on that
fascinating.
bombshell. The universe is inside of us. Vik, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You've been an absolutely fantastic guest on our Real Digital Stories. Until we meet again, thank you.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
Thank you, Vikal. Thank you.
Thank you.